So today's daf is daf Vav, and we'll give a little bit of an introduction here, so we have the background, and then we could zoom in, so to speak. Pardon the pun. And we have a machlokas here between Rav Masna and Rav Papa Bar Pada. That's going to be the subject of our learning today. According to Rav Masna, when a person accepts upon himself Nazirus, it's going to be Shloshim Yom. It's going to be 30 days. And all 30 days, he fulfills his obligation of Nazirus, which means that under normal circumstances, we'll see the exception a little bit later, his Giluach and Havas Karbanos, which are the termination of his Nazirus, will take place on day 31. Bar Pod, on the other hand, counts up the words in the parasha of Nazir and Nizro and so forth, and he comes up with the number 39. And Bar Pod, therefore, is of the opinion that when a person says Hareini Nazir, he accepts upon himself a Nazirus of 29 days, which would mean that on day number 30, he would bring his karbanos, the 3 behemoths that he has to bring, and he does Giluach. Now, another important point before we start Vav is that, let me just take care of one technicality here, is that with regard to Nazirus, when a person completes his first Nazirus, and then he takes upon himself a second Nazirus. Let's say, for example, we have a case later on where a person took upon himself a double Nazirus, which would mean 30 plus 30. And the issue is going to be, can he start the second round of 30 on the same day that he completes the first round of 30? And for that, the Gemara introduces a new concept, which is called Miktsas Hayom Kikulo. And what that means is that once he observes part of day 30 as Nazirus, that means for the morning of day 30, he abstains from Giluach, then that day 30 is already counted as, so to speak, post his Nazirus. He's already completed his Nazirus in the morning of day 30, and the rest, the balance of the day, could now be the first day of his new Nazirus, his second Nazirus. And this is called Miktsas Hayom Kekulo. So let's just give a little bit of an overview of the machlokes between Rav Masna and Bar Pada so that we can begin on Daf Vav. Number one, if a person accepts upon himself what's called Nazirus Stam, and that means he doesn't qualify that he wants more than just Nazirus Stam, then his Nazirus will terminate on day 30, and according to Bar Pada, his Nazirus will actually terminate on day 29, because Bar Pada is of the opinion that Stam Nazirus is 29 days. So therefore, he can actually complete his Nazirus on day 29. However, according to the Shita of Rav Masna, basically, you can have a case where he completes his Nazirus on day 30, even though Stam Nazirus is 30 days, and you and I would have expected that the entire day 30 is also part of his Nazirus. And that's true l'chatchila, that he should be observing all of day 30 as Nazirus, but b'di'eved, he would be allowed to cut his hair even on day 30, and that's because Rav Masna activates the principle of Miktsas Hayom Kikulo. Now, exactly how Mixas Hayom Kikulo operates, and why is it that according to Rav Masna, who says that Stam Nazirus is Shloshim Yom, he could complete his Nazirus on the morning of day 30 without having to observe Nazirus for the balance of day 30? How does that operate? Mixas Hayom Kikulo. It's kind of like a magical principle that applies outside, way beyond the confines of Nazirus. It applies in Avelus, it applies in Shiva Nikiyim of Zava Gedola. What is Mixas Hayom Kikulo? So they're basically, again, I'm oversimplifying a very complicated sugya, but there are two basic approaches to this principle called Mixas Hayom Kikulo. According to one approach, all you need is a yom. It's the last day of what's called a malos, mem, lamed, aleph, tov. And that last day, once you cross over into that last day, then it's as if the day is ola. Ola means it counts for the malos. So in this perspective, what we're saying is that if on day 30, and mind you, we're going according to Rav Masna, who requires 30 days of Avelus in the case of Avelus Stam, when he observes that morning of the 30th day as a Nazir, and he abstains from Giluach, from cutting his hair, then he has already counted the 30th day. You can check off the day because Mixas Hayom Kikulo. The other approach is totally different. And the other approach says that if he starts by observing day 30, then Mixas Hayom Kikulo establishes that it's as if he observed and implemented the dinim of that day 30 throughout the entire day. So it's not that just carrying over into the 30th day allows us to count that day as the completion of his malos of 30 days, but rather we see it as if he has observed his Nazirus the entire 30 days. Whichever way you approach it, it's always magical. It's always based on some halacha l'moshe misinai. The Gemara never actually asks the question, from whence do we derive this principle of Mixas Hayom Kikulo? And the impression you get, it's one of two things. Either Mixas Hayom Kikulo is halacha l'moshe misinai, or alternatively, it's a svara. And if it's a svara, then the first approach that we suggested is a little bit more palatable than the second. The first approach has it that he's already entered into the airspace, into the territory of day 30, and he's already fulfilled his Nazirus on that day. So we can count that day towards his Nazirus. That's a little bit logical. I wouldn't say it's totally a svara. The second approach, that it's as if he fulfilled his Nazirus during the entire day, that's a little bit more complicated. And the one who studies this in depth is Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman. And in his Kovetz HaAros, he claims that there's a nafkamina, there's a basic difference between these two definitions of Mixas Hayom Kikulo if there was stira on that day. So let's say, for example, according to Rav Masna, that Stam Nazirus is Shloshim Yom, he began day 30 by observing Nazirus, and then subsequently on that day, he came in contact with a dead body. And Tumah, as you know, is one of those elements that's antithetical to Nazirus. Now, if we say that day 30 was already checked off in the morning, because as we said before, he overlapped and entered into day 30, then that Tumah should have no impact on the Nazirus that he already fulfilled during the entire 30-day period, which was completed in the morning of the 30 days. He'll have to just wait 7 days until he's mitayar himself, and that means he needs hazah, b'shlishi, b'shvi, and so forth and so on, in order to now bring his karbanos that will terminate his Nazirus. But that's only a 7-day wait. If, on the other hand, we define Mixas Hayom Kikulo as if he had observed the entire day, that's fine if the day goes by uneventful. But if on that very day, at some point, he comes in contact with Tumah, we no longer have the ability to say, well, he observed the entire day and it was collapsed into that short period of time, because in reality, who are we fooling? He did not observe that entire day, day 30, as a Nazir, because there was a stira during that day. And then he'll have to start from the beginning with a brand new period of 30 days. But let me make one last point before we start the daf for today. And that is, and I'm quoting here the Rosh says that if a person says, Hareini Nazir Chaf Tes Yamin, he explicitly wants to take Nazirus of 29 days, not more. According to Bar Pada, in this scenario, he's allowed to cut his hair on day 30, because clearly he only accepted Nazirus of 29 days, and the halacha validates a Nazirus of 29 days because of the 29 times it says Nazir in the parasha Nazir. However, according to Rav Masna, there's no such entity as Nazirus that's less than 30 days. Therefore, he's going to have to complete the entire 30th day. And now we can start Daf Vav, which is the Daf for today. And the Gemara now is focused on a Mishnah, which is quoted on the bottom of Daf Heyom and Beis. And this Mishnah, which appears later on in Masechet Nazir, on Daf Tezayim, is going to occupy our minds pretty much for the balance of today's shir. The Mishnah establishes, and we'll read it here on Daf Heyom and Beis, Misha Nazar Shtei Nazirus. The Mishnah says if a person took upon himself 2 Nazirios, what does that mean? And here we have 2 possibilities. Either he said, Harei Olai Shtei Nazirios, or alternatively, he said Hareini Nazir, and then he repeated himself and said Hareini Nazir. And the Mefarshim go to town, are these 2 different opinions, or are they both correct? In any event, we're in a situation of a person who's obligated not in 1 Nazirus, but rather in 2. And the Mishnah establishes that he brings his karbanos, umegaleach es harishona, when he completes his first Nazirus, and the Mishnah is going to tell you exactly on what day that happens, he cuts his hair, and that's biyom shloshim v'echad. It's got to be on the 31st day. That really supports the opinion of Rav Masna, that Nazirus is 30 days. He has to wait until day 31 to cut his hair. So day 30, he'll complete his Nazirus. And even though, keep in mind, Rav Masna accepts the opinion of Mitzvah Yom Kekulo, but that's only B'di'evid, and L'chatchila, we wanted to observe the entire balance of day 30. So he will bring his karbanos and cut his hair on day 31. Vashnia liyom shishim v'echad. What does that mean, number 61? That's the 31st day from the beginning of the second Nazirus. If the first Nazirus ends on day 31, then count another 30 days, and you're up to day 61. And that's the day in which he has passed the entire period of the second Nazirus. Bishlei Rav Masna Nicha. This fits beautifully and reflects the shita of Rav Masna. And the reason for that is because he completes his first Nazirus with the Giluach of day 31. We count another 30 days, we get to 60, and on day 61, he completes his second Nazirus. And now we start Davav. El Bar Pada, Kasha, according to Bar Pada, who holds that Nazirus is 29 days. I'm talking about Stam Nazirus. He didn't add any qualifications. He didn't say Shlemus. If he adds the word Shlemus, then he wants 30 days. But in the absence of the word Shlemus or Shalem, he just says 2 words, Hareini Nazir. He completes his Nazirus on day 29. And therefore, he should be megaleach his saros on day 30, not on day 31. And yet the Mishnah says explicitly, megaleach b'yom shloshim v'echad. Why shloshim v'echad? He completed his Nazirus on day 29. On day 30, even though, again, keep in mind that Bar Pada does not accept the principle of Mikzas Hayom Kikulo, but so what? He observed the entire 30th day as Nazirus. He should be able to be Megalech his Seyar. I'm sorry, scratch that. He observed the entire 29th day as a Nazir. He should be able to be Megalech on day 30. And on that day 30, he could begin his second Nazirus because he completed his first Nazirus on day 29. On day 30, he's already into the second Nazirus, which would mean that he can complete the second Nazirus on day 60, not on day 61. Amalach Bar Pada Ema Sefer. Although I have to concede that the Reisha is problematic, but if we look at the Sefer of the exact same Mishnah, you'll see an explicit proof to my Shita that Stam Nazirus is 29 days. And in the light of the Sefer, we're going to go back to the Reisha and shed a new light on the Reisha.
When you say complete, does that mean he has the second set of Karbonis is done on the 61st or the 62nd?
Well, again, if he completes his Nazirus according, I'm hoping that we're talking according to Pada. So he completed his Nazirus at the end of day 29. He brought his Karbonos on day 30. That day 30 becomes the first day of his second set of Nazirus.
Rav Masna, sorry.
Oh, let's go back to Rav Masna for a moment. According to Rav Masna, he completes his Nazirus at the end of day 30, because l'chatchila, we don't implement Mikzayom Kikulo. He brings the Karbonos and he's Megalech on day 31. Day 31 now becomes the beginning of his new Nazirus. And the second Nazirus, because again, we're talking about a case where he accepted upon himself two Nazirus, then he will now arrive at day 30, starting with day 31 on day 61. So from the beginning of Nazirus until the termination of his second Nazirus is 61 days. Everything in the Reisha seems to prove the Shita of Nasna. But now the Gemara says, let's look. I'm going to hold on to questions. I don't know again your rules with Rav Aryeh, but I'll take questions whenever I can take questions, because otherwise I won't be able to finish the daf. Is that okay? Is that all right?
Yeah.
Again, I don't know.
Just one point to pick up.
Yeah, again, Rabosai, the question here, I always have to figure out in a case where I'm a guest, what are the rules of the game? I'm going to set the following rules. I will answer questions, but we have to get to a certain point when we see a broader picture. So let's see if we can get to a broader picture. What do we see in the Sefer? So again, in the Reisha, we completed the Nazirus Rishona, the first Nazirus, on day 31. We completed the second Nazirus 30 days later on day 61. But now take a look at the Sefer. The Sefer says that im gilech es harishon el yom shloshim, he could be megalech on the 30th day, which would mean that the 30th day, terminating his first Nazirus, because he terminates that with giluach, now becomes the first day of his second Nazirus. And now, if we add the second Nazirus on top of the first Nazirus that concluded on day 30, then he could be Megalech 30 days later on day 60. And that's only b'di'evet. El Sefer Vadi Messiah. There's no question that the Sefer is a head-on collision that absolutely undermines the Shita of Rav Masna, because according to Rav Masna, what does it mean that b'di'evet he went ahead and he was Megaleach on day 30. How could he be Megalech on day 30 when he needs 30 days of Nazirus? The ratio makes sense according to Rav Masna, because the earliest day for his Giluach to terminate his Nazirus is going to be day 31, after he completed 30 days of Nazirus. But the Sefer says that he could be Megalech on day 30. That's impossible according to Rav Masna, is it not? Unless we introduce the principle of what? Of Mixas Hayom Kikulo. Ela Sefer Misayele. And therefore comes along Bar Pada, and he says, once I have a proof from the Sefer, let's shed a new light on the Reisha. The Reisha is telling us what should be L'chatchila. L'chatchila, he should observe the entire 29 days, and the Giluach should be not on day 30, but on day 31. And the reason for that is the Omer Shlemim. What does that mean by Omer Shlemim? When a person accepts upon his Nazirus, in the daf that we saw yesterday, by adding the word Shlemim, then what he's saying is that he will accept 30 days of Nazirus. That's the word Shlemim. And even according to Bar Pada, if in his Kabbalah's Nazirus he added the word Shlemim, he has accepted upon himself voluntarily the 30th day, which means that the earliest day that he could be Megaleach is going to be day 31, which is exactly what took place in the Reisha of our Mishnah on Daf Tezayin that we're quoting now. The Seif, on the other hand, is describing a B'diavad situation where he said, Hareini Nazir Shloshim Yom Shlemim. And Bar Pada agrees that in this case, his Giluach should take place on what day? On day 31. He went ahead and he's Galech on day 30. And the Gemara is assuming now that even though, according to Bar Pada, he has to observe the entire 30-day period. Why? Because even Bar Pada agrees that if he adds the word Shlemim, he needs an Nazirus of 30 days. And L'chatchila, therefore, his Giluach has to be on day 31. But that's only L'chatchila. B'diavad, even though he said, I want Shlemim, then we have the Reisha. The Reisha of our Mishnah says that he went ahead and he was... So L'chatchila, once again, L'chatchila, he should have been Megaleach on Yom Shloshim V'echad. And that's what it says in the Reisha now. We asked the question on the Reisha. Well, if we hold like Bar Pada, then why in the Reisha was he Megaleach on Yom Shloshim V'echad? And the answer to that question is because the Reisha is addressing a situation where he accepted upon himself not Hareini Nazir, but rather Hareini Nazir Shloshim Yom Shlemim. By adding the word Shlemim, then he has pushed off his Giluach until day 31. And even Bar Pada would agree that he cannot be Megalech before day 31, because keep in mind, Bar Pada doesn't operate with Mitzayom Kikulo, and since he accepted upon himself in the Nazirus of Shloshim Yom by adding the word Shlemim, the 30th day in its entirety has to be observed as Nazirus. The Seif, on the other hand, according to Bar Pada, is talking about a case where, although on a Derabanan level, which was the daf of yesterday, Bar Pada is always afraid that even if he didn't add the word Shlemim, we're afraid that he might confuse it in a case of Hareini Nazir with a case of Hareini Shlemim, and therefore we will advocate L'chatchila that he should do his Giluach only on day 31 because of the confusion. Again, we can't go over all of Daf Hey, but that was the principle of Daf Hey, and therefore on a Derabanan level, L'chatchila should be waiting till day 31, even though in the Sefer he only said Hareini Nazir. He didn't add the word Shlemim, but nevertheless, we're going to consider it as if he added the word Shlemim because of the Gzeira D'Rabbanan, that we might confuse Hareini Nazir with Hareini Nazir Shlemim, and therefore we're going to require that he wait and postpone his Giluach until day 31. So the entire Mishnah now beautifully reflects the Shita of Rav Masna, of Bar Pod. Why? Because again, if we take the Sefer is saying that, very good, he does his Giluach on day 30 because he completed his Nazirus according to Bar Pod on day 29. And then on day 30, he counts another 30 days, 30 plus 30 equals 60. That's the Sefer. The Reish introduces the Shlemim business, where L'chatchila, we're afraid of the situation in which he said Shlemim, and therefore we require of him L'chatchila, if all is well, that he do the Giluach on day 31. But what are we going to do with Rav Masna? Well, Rav Masna, Kashya's Sefer, how could it be that in the Sefer we allow and validate his Giluach on day 30 when Stam Nazirus is 30 days? So he hasn't completed his Nazirus on day 30. And the answer is Amalcha Rav Masna, Tani Sefer, Yom Shloshim Ole Lekanu Lekan. Okay, now we're going to see that since he accepted upon himself a double Nazirus, day number 30 can now be the end of his first Nazirus, and so he observes Nazirus in the morning of day 30, and then he has completed his Nazirus, he cuts his hair, brings the Karbanos, and the balance of that day is going to be what? Is going to be the first day of his second Nazirus, which is going to terminate 30 days later on day number 60. And that's exactly how Rav Masna is going to understand the Sefer. How can the Sefer allow Yom Shloshim to be Ol Lekanu Lekan? And the answer is that in the morning of Yom Shloshim, he completes his Nazirus. How does that work? Maihi, why is day 30 complete and his Nazirus is completed on the morning of day 30? After all, he needs 30 days of Nazirus, according to Rav Masna, because Tam Nazir Shloshim Yom. And the answer is because Mixas Hayom Kekulo. Now, Mixas Hayom Kekulo is going to work now in two different directions. Mixas Hayom Kekulo is going to allow the observance of the morning of day 30 to be considered as if he completed his Nazirus on day 30. And he's going to bring his Karbanos and observe Giluach. Now the end of day 30, the second part of day 30, is another Mixas Hayom Kekulo. Not a Mixas Hayom Kekulo b'tchilaso, but rather a Mixas Hayom Kekulo b'sofa. And now the end of day 30 becomes the beginning of day 1. So Gemara asks for Amra Chada Zimna. We already went through this in the Reisha. The Reisha says that if he says Hareni Nazir, and he went ahead and he was Galeach on day 30, he was Yotze, which according to Rav Masna can only be because he observed the morning of day 30, and we apply the principle of Mixayom Kekulo. Why would the Mishnah feel compelled to repeat it? Malditem, I would have thought. Hani Milu. When could we apply Mixayom Kekulo? That's Li'inyan Chadar Nazirus. In the Havamin of the Malditem, it's impossible for one single day to be Oleh for Shtei Nazirios. El Shtei Nazirus Lo. Okay, you want to apply Mixayom Kekulo on day 30. Fine. But don't tell me now that day 30 is not only the termination of his first Nazirus, but it's also the beginning of his second Nazirus. One day is one element and one enterprise. And it either belongs to one Nazirus or another. Call it the Hashlama, the completion of the first Nazirus. Call it the beginning of the second Nazirus. But don't call it both. That's called La'ak Trei Raksha. You can't, ride the horse from two different sides in two different directions. Called Mashmalan. And the Mishnah is telling me that no, that you can have a Mixas Hayom Kekulo that works in two directions, both backwards and forwards, to fulfill two different Nazirios. The first Nazirus as a completion of Mixas Hayom Kekulo, and the second as the beginning of the second Nazirus, and then he can complete his Nazirus through a double Mixas Hayom Kekulo on day number 60. Okay, now we could take a question or two if you...
I was just going to ask when you say Shleimim, does that include the Karbonis or not?
No. The word shleima means that he will observe the Isurei Nazirus. There are 3 Isurei Nazirus, as you know, and he will observe them even on day 30. According to Bar Pada, normally, if he didn't have the word Shlemos, he would not observe Nazirus on day 30. Because Stam Nazirus, Hareni Nazir, is 29 days. But if he has the word Shlemim, and Midrabanan, we're afraid that even if he didn't have the word Shlemim, but Stam Nazirus is, you could be confused, he might confuse it with Shlemim, and therefore we're going to ask him to bring his karbanos and cut off his hair on day 31.
But he's going to, how can he do that now? In other words, doesn't he have to wait till day 60? Or 6, in other words,
I'm not sure what you mean.
How can he do
Nazirus. He completes his first Nazirus and he cuts his hair, begins his second Nazirus, he observes another 30 days of Nazirus, and then again he cuts his hair a second time.
But if you're saying that day is Oila Lakan or Lakan, he's already started his second Nazirus, how can he be Megaleach?
Because again, you're only dealing with an Isa D'Rabbanan now. We're in the framework of Bar Pada. Your question would be excellent according to Rav Elchanan that we mentioned earlier, according to Rav Masna, because Rav Masna has the concept perhaps of stira, right? But now we're not talking about Rav Masna, we're talking about Bar Pada. So if we're talking about Bar Pada, then he already fulfilled his Nazirus on day 29. It's only that the Rabbanan will require of him l'chatchila to extend his Nazirus as if he had said Shlemim and observe his Nazirus on day 30. Tanan, let's go on. Now we're learning the same Mishnah in Nazirus on Daf Tezayin, but the next part of the Mishnah. And this is going to be a tremendous kasha on Bar Pada. Why? Because the Mishnah now is going to discuss a case where he accepted upon himself 2 Nazirios, and he was Mgaleach on the 30th day for the first Nazirus. And the Mishnah establishes that im Gilech biyom shishim chaser echad yotza. Why? He was Megaleach now for the second Nazirus on Yom Shishim Chaser Echad. Now again, Chaser Echad is not foreign to Bar Pada, because Bar Pada has Shloshim Chaser Echad in Stam Nazirus of 29 days, and he can apply the same principle, obviously, for the second Nazirus. And now the Mishnah says that he can start his second Nazirus on Yom Shloshim of the first Nazirus. And that really sounds like Mikzas Hayom Kekula. And yet the Mishnah says that if he was Megaleach on day 30 of the first Nazirus, he can complete his Nazirus 29 days later on day 59. How can he complete his Nazirus on day 59? Says the Mishnah, because Yom Shloshim Olu Lo Min HaMinyan. He completed his Nazirus on the first round, already on day 30, and now day 30 could count as the first day of the second Nazirus, which according to Bar Pada should be ending on day 59. But how can he count the last day of the first Nazirus as the first day of the second Nazirus? Bishleim Rav Masna Nicha. Rav Masna is fine, because Rav Masna is operating within the framework of Mikzas Hayom Kekula. And therefore, the 30th day is now in the morning, the completion of his first Nazirus, and in the afternoon and the evening, the beginning of his fulfillment of the second Nazirus. Because in both cases, we apply the principle of Mikzas Hayom Kekula. El Bar Pada. But according to Bar Pada, I don't understand. Ha'amar shloshim chaser echad. According to Bar Papa, Stam Nazirus is only 29 days. So therefore, when he was Megaleach on day 30, then he already fulfilled his mitzvah of Nazirus. So then, if that be the case, fine. So we have day 30, and now day 30 completes his, again, keep in mind, he completed his Nazirus on day 29, but he does the Giluach after the completion of the Nazirus on day 30. Okay, fine. So day 30 now, he completes his Nazirus, meaning he removes himself from Nazirus. So now the Mishnah, L'chora, is a stira to Bar Pada. Why? Because the Mishnah establishes that he can count that Yom Shloshim as the beginning of the second Nazirus. Now keep in mind that Bar Pada is not operating within the framework of Mitzvah Yom Kikulah. So if that be the case, according to Bar Papa, once we have Stam Nazirus for 29 days, the Giluach for the entire period of his Nazirus was on day number 30. He has already fulfilled his mitzvah of Nazirus. So why does the Mishnah say that in Giluach, if he was Megalech on the 60th day, Chaser Echad, Yatza? Well, why is he Yotze over here? You're telling me because, the day is Ol Lakan Lakan. Forget about the day being Ol Lakan Lakan. On day 59, which is the 29th day after he started his second Nazirus, he's already completed his Nazirus. He completed his first Nazirus after 29 days of observing Nazirus. He did the Giluach on day 30. And now, that day 30 should be the first day of his new Nazirus. And now we have 29 days of Nazirus, and therefore, it doesn't make sense when it says that B'di'eved was Yotze on day 59. What do you mean B'di'eved was Yotze on day 59? That's exactly what he should be doing. In fact, there could be an argument here, say the Mefarshim, that we could add 29 and 29, and that would lead me to 58, not 59. Why? Because you have 29 of observing, another 29 of observing, all told 59. 58. And yet the Mishnah says we need how many days? 59 days. So the Gemara says the following. According to Rav Masna, it works out beautifully. Because according to Rav Masna, what we need is day 30 to complete his first Nazirus, because there's no Nazirus that ends less than 30 days. That doesn't exist in the framework of Rav Masna. And now you can begin your second Nazirus on day 30 of the first Nazirus, because we have Mitzvah Yom Kikulo, and therefore it's Ol Lakan Lakan. And now he counts 29 days, and on day 30, he completes his Nazirus. And therefore, if you add the two together, it works out beautifully. But according to Bar Pada, how do we understand this Mishnah? Bar Pada says, this is exactly my source. From whence did I derive in the Mishnah that Stam Nazirus is 29 days? And the answer is, I learned it from this Mishnah itself. Why is Yom Shloshim considered part of the second Nazirus? How could that be? Unless you have to assume that he completed Nazirus on day 29. You see here clearly, says Bar Pada, that Nazirus ends on day 29. Therefore, day 30 is the beginning of his second Nazirus. I count another 29 days, and then he'll bring his karbanos on day 59. But the Gemara says, wait a minute, Bar Pada, you're against the Mishnah. Because Tanan, the Mishnah says, Misham Hareini Nazir, which means he did not add the word Shlemos. Nitma Yom Shloshim Soser Es HaKol. Why? He completed his Nazirus according to Bar Pada on day 29. And let's say he became Tomei on day 30. Okay, give him another 7 days to be Matayr himself from Tumah. But it's not Soser his whole Nazirus. He completed his whole Nazirus. Okay, he hasn't brought his Karbanos yet. But the Gemara is of the opinion that even if he hasn't brought his Karbanos, the entity of Nazirus, the Kiyum of Hareini Nazir, was fulfilled and clinched after 29 days. So why are you telling me that an event that he was Soser on that day, meaning on day 29, and he was Nitma, then he's Soser Sakol? What are you talking about? If he finished the entire 29-day period, okay, if he had a contact with Tumah on day 29, nicha. But what about the case of the Mishnah where he contracted Tumah, he came in contact with a mess on day number 30? If it's on day number 30, he's already completed his Nazirus. Why are you telling me that according to Bar Pada, the Mishnah, Soser es Hakol, Bishleim Rav Masna Nicha. According to Rav Masna, that Nazirus is Shloshim Yom. And now there was a stira on day 30. And as we said at the outset, even if you hold Miksa Yom Kekulo, that is conditional on the fact that there won't be a stira. And here, on day 30, he may have woken up in the morning and observed his Nazirus, but during the subsequent part of the day, he came in contact with a dead body, and therefore he was soser his Nazirus. So we can't apply the principle of Miksa Sayom Kikula. And now we understand that within the framework of his Nazirus, he was soser his Nazirus. He's got to start from the beginning. El Bar Pada, I don't understand. Bar Pada holds that the Nazirus was complete when? On the 29th day. So if he has a Tumah on day 30, I can understand that he has to wait until he brings his Karbanos, a 7-day period of time until he undergoes purification. But there's no reason to be soser his entire Nazirus. And now we have to